Alright, so I've got a new kind of video. It's not a RuneScape video at all because endgame Iron Man content takes literally forever, literally months to come out with any progress because it's such a grindy game. So I figured I'd do some Facebook videos and see what you guys think of that. Maybe these will be entertaining for someone out there. So, I've been getting into politics recently on my Facebook, and I'll blur out the names of everyone here. So, if you are from my Facebook watching this, don't worry, I'm not going to dox you or anything. So, let's look at this one post here and go over one of the essays that I wrote in response to a comment. The original post is something that I shared on my wall, and it reads, "Listen, no one is vilifying rich people. They are villains. If you run a billion-dollar company, give yourself millions of dollars in benefits, but pay your individual workers less than a living wage and give them shitty insurance, what are you, if not a villain?" And I thought that was, kind of profound, maybe some rhetoric that'll change somebody's mind out there, some persuasion. And I got a comment on it, and it is from, I'll call this person, oh dear, where did that go? Oh, I can actually just close out of that and do that. Okay, so this person, I'll call them Stevo. That's not their listed name, but that is their nickname, just so he can identify himself when I make this video. He says, "I worked on campus. Let's start with them. They rob people, brainwash them, put them in debt, then their workers on campus make dick." Okay, let's talk about that comment a little bit before we get into my comment that I wrote back to him. So, he worked on campus. I knew some campus workers too. I didn't work on campus when I was going to campus, but I know the campus he worked at. I know this guy. He's in the same town as me. And he's right for the most part. Let's start with them. They rob people. Okay. Tuition is crazy expensive. They put them in debt. Yeah, that's a big problem. There's a student debt crisis, and the workers make dick. Yeah, and they don't pay very well at all. Even the professors don't get paid well. I remember I had several professors that were complaining about their shitty wages. But the brainwashing thing, I have a couple reservations about, which I'll cover in the essay. So that's the main thing that, you know, strikes a red flag is the use of the term brainwashing. I don't like that term. That refers to something very specific. There's a documentary out there on MK Ultra about a bunch of Canadian folks that were actually suing the federal government for the MK Ultra program for compensation for relatives who had been victims of what I'm talking about. I'll see if I can find the name of that real quick. Alright, so here's a web page on that group, or an article rather. This group is located in Montreal, and there was a whole movement, I guess, to get the abuse claims going out there. But this is the film down here. The Fifth Estate Brainwashed, the Secret CIA Experiments in Canada. And there was, they paid out more than $500,000, which was worth $4 million a day for one family. And in this documentary, I believe they go over a few people who got financial compensation. So this isn't some conspiracy theory type stuff when I talk about MK Ultra and brainwashing. There is such a thing, and it's not what's going on in classrooms. Um, Brainwashing is something very, very specific, and I just scrolled there. I hope I didn't dox his name. Alright, so my essay. Let's just straight up read this out. I had to make sure my mic was on for a second. Gosh, if I went through all that. Let's discuss this a bit, though. I wouldn't say that they rob people. That's definitely hyperbole. but I'll save the financial talk for the last paragraph, so I'll get back to that. I get what you mean, though, and it is also true that people who work on campus make very little money compared to other people in society, and that includes most professors. And this is especially true when you look at actors and actresses and movie stars and musicians and pop stars and sports athletes and things of that nature who get paid a lot. And that just says something about their usefulness in society. Also, certain artists are making absolute bank. So tuition is high, so high that it's creating debt traps for life. And that's true. So I agree with him there. Campus jobs pay the lowest wages possible, just like any other entity in a capitalist society. That is true, in reference to him talking about how they pay very little. In fact, most jobs pay very little in general. You only really get paid a lot if you own the job. Now, when it comes to brainwashing, I'm not sure how you define brainwashing, but I'll assume that what you mean is a sort of hyperbole, and you're not referring to that MK Ultra thing that I just mentioned, because that's not what they do in class, and that's a very specific thing. You're looking for different words. I think the term rhetoric might be in what you want to say, unethical rhetoric, but I'll assume that you're using the term as a hyperbolic representation of the use or presence of political rhetoric in academic settings. I would partly agree and partly disagree that that is the case. So, firstly, I agree that universities are not fully unbiased in their political stances. Where I studied is definitely on the liberal side of the political spectrum. I agree that, well, first off, let me touch and say that I had some professors that were conservative and some that were liberal. In fact, I remember specifically our political science professor and freshman seminar professor, he taught both things, was actually a conservative. So just throwing that out there too. So it's not universal. Not all people at a liberal arts academy are liberal. There are conservative professors, believe it or not. So I agree that professors have political opinions that become apparent after listening to them talk for an hour a day for 3 days a week. They make little side comments, facial expressions when they talk about certain things. They kind of scoff at some ideas, and you can kind of get a gist of who stands for what. However, if that's all it really takes to fit the definition of brainwashing, then every book, every television show, every teacher, college or high school level, or even elementary level, and every film, even this video, is on some degree of brainwashing tool. And brainwashing starts to become synonymous with learning or brain changing or just changing your mind. Anyone that tries to get you to change your mind is in a way brainwashing you. And if that's all the word means, then it's not a very potent word, and it's not a very useful hyperbole, and it's kind of emphatic and meaningless. On the other side of the coin, though, we have these religious universities like St. Bonaventure that are typically more conservative and, in the same sense, brainwash their students on the opposite side of the political spectrum, if that's what we're going to call it. Still don't like the term, but if that's the term we're using, then. Now, as for myself, since people claim that I've been brainwashed to be more left, I'd just have to flatly disagree with that, because I have clear memories of this one high school teacher about political topics from a left leaning perspective, I'd argue with him. And he was definitely on the right wing side. And I was left wing back then, I guess, is what I was getting at in high school, before college. Also, I think it's more of the case that our high school and places like other high schools are responsible for the sort of rhetoric that you call brainwash to a much higher degree than what the universities are doing, from what I've seen at least. And one example of how that's the case is that teacher had to edit this because I doxed him on accident and said his name, graded his civics class in such a way that resembled that. Now at UPB, I never really got graded on my opinion, but at the high school I kind of did. Like I got graded on understanding the material at college, not really whether or not I agreed with it. And there were a lot of essays I wrote about disagreeing with the material, and I'd still do well on those essays because I was graded by the points I made and by my understanding of the topic rather than which side on the topic I was taking. Just whether or not I understood it. What side you took didn't matter. It was just that you learned what it was about. Now, for a specific comparison, there was this one ethics class that I had. It was a philosophy class, and we covered controversial political topics like abortion, euthanasia, animal rights, things of that nature. And we got graded on how well we understood the arguments by the philosophers on both sides. Like whether or not we agreed with Peter Singer, we had to know what his main points were, and we'd read things from our textbook and we'd read essays that they had written that my professor would print out and bring to class for us. uh, like here's your text for this 2 week period of study, and that would be all the topics in there. And then we'd write essays on how well we could understand their positions, and that's what our tests were, is essay-based tests, handwritten essays at that as well. So we had to write about and understand the arguments presented in both the pro-choice and pro-life positions and explain that position, not pick a side. In fact, our essays, we had to, for this one project we had to talk about one specific person and then compare and contrast between the students. And also, yes, I see that I wrote arrangements there rather than arguments. That is a typo that I might go back and fix. So contrarily, let's contrast that UPB experience with high school. In civics, when we covered controversial topics, we had a mock debate project instead of like a mock essay instead of an essay project where we compared what we all wrote, we had a actual class debate with like the tables rearranged and everything, and we all had to pick a side on an issue and then write what issue and what side, and that was how the debate was planned. Then we'd have a week to prepare, and then the rest of the class would grade us on how we presented and vote on who was right. So it was half graded by the class. And in a Republican town, I bet you could imagine how fair the grading was for that. Furthermore, I would say that this method of teaching what these issues are, if you're a teacher and you want to teach about what sides of the abortion topic there are and whatnot, especially at a high school level, I'd say that method has a lot more persuasive tactics. It sways students to one side more than another than any essay assignment that I've ever come across. And a lot of that has to do with social dynamics and peer pressure and things of that nature. So, I actually failed that civics project, one of the only projects I ever failed in my entire time at high school. And the teacher didn't do any more debates like that for the rest of the year because of how unfairly students were grading each other. But I think some credit goes to him too, especially for the rest of his class, or the rest of his lessons, I should say. That could be ambiguous. Anyway, my topic was whether or not cannabis ought to be legal. I like the word cannabis better than marijuana, but that's the word that he used. So I said it ought to be legalized. And he said that my sources weren't credible, even though I had several sources for each thing I said. And I was saying things like there's no deaths associated with it. It's been used in Chinese medicine for a couple of thousand years. And I had a quote by the head of the FDA that said that many, or no, it was the head of the DEA, actually, that said that many of the foods in the food industry are actually more dangerous than cannabis. And those sources weren't considered to be credible. And I ended up failing the project on that alone because we were graded on how many points we could come up with. And since my points weren't credible, they got not counted as points. So I lost a lot of percentage on the final project. Plus, the class didn't grade me well because other social reasons that I talked about. And that also led to why that debate project wasn't repeated. I also remember the people who took the pro choice side, some of them were my friends, they got poor grades because they used pathos, which is the element of emotional appeal, in their debate. And we were specifically not allowed to use that, but then, and they got docked for that because they talked about fair rights for the mother. Like, what about her rights as a person and her treatment being forced to carry the term and all that? And that was considered too much of an emotional argument. But then the pro life group was allowed to show pictures of abortions. But yeah, the other group was allowed to show those types of pictures, which I think universally is emotionally provocative. Let's say that. So that teacher was extremely biased all throughout the year and in the other classes that I had with him. And he'd pretty much just discredit anything that challenged his personal positions too much. Like if a certain fact didn't work with his predetermined ideology, then he'd just say that that fact was false and the source that you got that fact from isn't a legitimate source without even actually looking into it or investigating the source. Like, there's very much a bias with that teacher. So when it comes to brainwashing, I think there's a better term for it, and it has more to do with rhetoric. And I'd say that rhetoric is everywhere in society, and universities aren't special for using it. There's rhetoric in the workplace. Like, there, it's everywhere. There's rhetoric in advertising. That's all advertising is a line of rhetoric to persuade you to buy a certain thing. So there's that. And secondly, I would say that the high school is more guilty of the type of unethical rhetoric, what you mean by brainwashing, than the universities that you're criticizing. Lastly is the issue of cost, because when Jimmy Carter was in office, tuition was cheap. It didn't start to rise until Reagan got in 1987. And there's a lot of speculations on why it's been rising, but one that I've seen a couple of times floating around is because of student aid in general, because Reagan made this program where the federal government could give financial aid to students, and all these other financial aid programs started popping up, and instead of just paying a couple $100s a semester that you could, work for as a summer job and pay off, it wasn't very expensive. And more students applied for aid, more students went to college, and meanwhile, supply and demand, the colleges were kind of short on the supply side, so they had to raise their costs because of all the people coming in. They couldn't accommodate all of them. And so they had to hire more staff and expand, which is expensive, especially physical expansion. And then on the student side of things, that meant that not anyone could just go on a playing. You'd need some amount of money, or at least decent academics, which is how it kind of should be, with scholarships and things of that nature. And people who were both broke and poor academically didn't end up going to college. And then they repeated the same pattern, the Republicans, Reagan and both Bushes, and they gave out more financial aid, more federal support, and it caused the same pattern to increase tuition again. And with every time it was repeated, tuition just kept rising in a cycle. So that's what it looks like. Looks like Republican leaders kind of did shit to make college more expensive while doing shit to make corporate entities very, very wealthy. And these are all the types of policies that relate to trickle-down theory. Everything that Reagan and Bush put out there that followed the trickle-down logic, which, by the way, is an utter failure. I don't think anyone can make the argument in 2019 that trickle-down economics is a viable understanding of economics. And now, those same people want to keep those corporate entities wealthy at the expense of the wealth of everyone else, because wealth is relative. There's only so much wealth in society. And they vilify the institutions that would empower the people to alter that pattern of wealth distribution in such a way that we could democratically agree is fair, like voting. And that has to do with fair wages. What I mean by fair wages, so that people are making around the same amount of money for their labor, and not just a fair chance at a corporate lottery, because whether or not you get to be manager, someone has to pick you for that. And out of a dozen people, who's going to get picked? Your chances are 1 in 12. Then of all the managers, who gets to rise above in that, and so on and so forth. And if you think you're going to be a billionaire CEO, your odds of that are kind of like winning the lottery or getting struck by lightning, which is why I compare it to the lottery. Because your odds of climbing the game ladder, the economic society ladder, that far to get up to that amount of wealth is an absurd statistic if you look at it. Like that 1 in 12 statistic for manager, multiply that by 1 in X and 1 in Y and 1 in Z, and then just keep multiplying it, and then eventually your odds are 1 in, how many people are there in the US versus how many CEOs right now? 1 in how many people is one of those guys? Yeah, that's what I mean by lottery. Statistics. So, I'm not trying to persuade anyone. That's just like my perspective. Some things I say in post are persuasive, but that's just my experience and what I've seen personally. Also, I think Bernie Sanders has a good idea when it comes to tuition-free universities and canceling student debt entirely. So, just like as a little summary, I don't think we ought to go after the universities, but I do agree that the people who work for them ought to be paid fairly. And as for going after anyone, let's look at why the student debt crisis is the way it is. And as for brainwashing, I don't think that's the right word, but I'll agree that it's unethical for academic institutions to integrate heavy propaganda and rhetoric with their lessons. However, I disagree with the speculation of who's guilty. I don't think it's the universities. I think it's more primary education than secondary. I'm talking grades K through 12 that are more guilty of this sort of brainwashing style of rhetoric that you're accusing the universities of. That's just my view. And why. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If you guys like this new style of video sort of content where I just read stuff that I'm talking about on my Facebook wall with different folks from town, let me know and I'll make more of these because I do a lot of writing and some people are interested, and RuneScape stuff is taking forever to produce. So, yeah, leave a like if you liked it. Also, let's have some more discussions down in the comments. I mean, religion and politics is interesting, and I know some people get heated over it, but I mean, I'm chill. I'd say that I write a lot out of anxiety rather than out of anger, if that makes sense. Some people think that I'm like an angry ranter when I'm writing these things, but actually I'm like a nervous nerd. Like, so yeah, that's how that goes. That's, I'd say, the reason why I want to make these videos too is so that people don't mistake me for a angry ranter and people recognize me as a nervous nerd instead, because I'm not at all angry. These are just ideas and speculations. I don't know, I'm just bored and writing stuff and thinking about topics in a town where I am the minority, politically speaking. And I guess being a minority in a, you know, place like this makes you more aware of the issues, I would say. Especially when I see all these posts that are like mocking the left and people who just don't really seem to understand what left leaning positions actually are, because they know what Bernie Sanders is about from Fox News. Not saying this guy does that I'm talking with here, but just some of the people on my Facebook wall. And yeah, I disagree. I vehemently disagree with a lot of stuff I see from stuff in town here. Like if we scroll down a little bit, if I just go to the home page. So here's a right-wing post that's talking about gun control from a right-leaning perspective, for one. And then here's something like this from this guy. That's kind of what their president is doing, actually. Um, Here's another one. And then this one, that's really right wing there, you know. And I could write a paragraph about why that meme is wrong. And then we've got this person saying yes to this policy. So there's another right wing. And then this person is, you know, posting this. So yeah, I'm definitely aware of the differing issues between me and everyone else I have on this page. And it's not just me or the internet. Most of the people on this page are actually from the same town. So I guess in the face of all that, that's encouraged me to become more political, or at least when I talk about politics, people notice it more and get more enthusiastic with talking with me back about politics, because I am of a minority political ideology in this town, like in a really big way. Like I am in a town full of hardcore Trump supporters, and I'm a Bernie Sanders guy. So But at any rate, yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Leave a like, sub up if this video helped you find my channel, and yeah, peace.